we have one item for consideration today that I will begin by asking the clerk to read into the record.
The item before us is City Attorney Report and Ordinances relative to amending Section 5611, Article 6, Chapter 5 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to address the storage of personal property in public areas. Also on January 25th, 2016, the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee has approved this item as amended.
Thank you very much. We're joined by the Vice Chair of the Committee, Councilmember Jose Huizar, and members Mike Bonin and Kern Price, and we will be joined shortly by Councilmember Cedillo. We'll begin this session with public comment. This public comment section will be shortened because we've had public comment on this 3 times, and then we'll have it again tomorrow in council. I have 3 cards in front of me. We're going to limit public comment to 20 minutes as a whole, and more are coming. I have Carol Schatz, Hal Baston, and Mark Ryavec.
Mr. Chair, would that be 1 minute each?
1 minute each.
Carol Schatz, President of Central City Association. We strongly urge you to support the amendment that came out of the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee. It is the only common sense approach for dealing with this issue. We are ground zero in downtown, but it is everywhere, and this is the only way you can enforce this ordinance given the very limited resources you have with the Bureau of Sanitation, enforcement officers, and LAPD. You cannot have a situation where they have to continue to come back out and see both of these conditions fulfilled. It simply will not work. If you basically support the concept of healthy and safe communities that balance the rights of all, this is the only thing you can do. Thank you.
Thank you. So do we, I don't see either clock, so we need a 20-minute clock and the clock for the speakers. Hal Baston and Mark Ryavec. Oh, there it is. My bad.
Okay, we got a clock. My name is Hal Baston. I've been a leader in the Downtown Renaissance for about 22 years, which is a good start. And I'm here to recommend and ask you to adopt this ordinance. The homeless situation, which is truly alcoholism, drug addiction, and mental illness, all wrapped up in one, we call it homelessness, is rampant. It may be a civil right to be homeless, but we are violating people's human rights to allow them to die in the public realm, in encampments and property and everything else that is on the streets, which take the rights away for the rest of the community. I've been clean and sober for 15 years, and I hope to do it for a day longer today. And right now we have a pathological acceptance that property being on the streets is acceptable, and we need to do something for all people to stop them from killing themselves in the public realm. And it's incumbent on the city and the county to do it. It's a complicated issue, but it's driving people away from Los Angeles. If you want the Olympics in 2024, you can't have the encampments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Ryavec, and I'm president of the Venice Stakeholders Association. I'm here to support the ordinance and ask that you adopt the one-word change that has been passed by the Public Works Committee, which would make it easier for city personnel to ask and have the result be that campers would take down their tents during the day. We have several sidewalks in Venice that are constantly blocked, in many instances from the property line to the curb, and it is difficult at the moment without some more direction and more enforcement option to be able to get the tents dismantled. And we think that dismantling the tents is important to stop these large-scale encampments that otherwise develop. We'd also ask if you eventually provide some definition to what ADA means so that we are assured passage. Thank you.
Raquel Beard, Rose Park, Martha Cox, Nikitaman, Nitikman.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Industrial District stakeholders who cannot be here, we support the ordinance as amended by the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee. The ordinance must have adequate enforcement mechanisms to prompt individuals to take down their tents daily between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. Otherwise, we all know the tents will not come down. We witness this every day in Skid Row. The sidewalks are completely impassable. Public health and safety threats are ever present. If conditions are not properly addressed, I have real fears about the threat of a public health epidemic of some sort. The ordinance puts in place a due process to begin addressing this crisis. We cannot build housing overnight, so we are faced with the intractable situation of having human beings living on the sidewalks, and this ordinance, as amended, gives the city means to manage this disgraceful reality. Businesses, residents, customers, and employees are all affected daily by the conditions in Skid Row, and there has to be some type of order restored to this very chaotic situation, and I ask that the committee support this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rose, and I represent a small business on Crocker Street, and we are for this proposal, and we feel that this would be the right step towards getting the city cleaner and being a safer environment, especially for the small business that we own. We have a lot of customers who are afraid to walk to our property or drive even to our property because of the conditions, and we know the homeless do not move, and no matter how many times we ask politely, they have refused outright, and I can't even walk from my one property to my neighbor's property without feeling safe. So we feel this is the right step so that we can be, it'll be a lot better for everyone just throughout the community.
Thank you. We have Stephanie Campbell, her son, Preciado.
Martha Cox-Nedickman with the Building Owners and Managers Association. We represent over 300 commercial office buildings throughout the region and more than 60 buildings in downtown Los Angeles. And we've worked hard to become a constructive voice on the issue of homelessness. In specific, I'm here today to support Alternative B as a method Alternative B as amended by the committee, because we think it's a balanced compromise for both the homeless and for property owners. According to a key provision in the bill, a violation occurs if a person refuses to deconstruct a tent or obstructs its removal. We believe this will encourage voluntary compliance with the daily tent deconstruction, which we think should be the city's goal. And we ask your support on this measure.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Campbell. I am a board member of the Can-Do Neighborhood Council, but I am here to represent myself and act as an individual, not a board member, but to represent issues that are going on in CD9. I'm here to ask you guys to support the ordinance. Homelessness and issues related to homelessness has affected South Central and CD9, I think a little bit more than other parts of the city. But at the same time, we understand that we need a balance between the rights of the residents and the stakeholders. Well, actually, everybody's a stakeholder. We have to balance rights between homeowners and the homeless, and so hopefully this change in ordinance will help that. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Herson Preciado. I represent a coalition of businesses in Councilman Curran Price's District 9. We are between 36th Street and Martin Luther King, and roughly between Broadway and Main. We represent 15 businesses, but it's over 40 buildings with almost 1,000 employees. We definitely support this amendment, and we please implore you to do more. Obviously, the homelessness problem is growing every day, and it's not just downtown. We're suffering in this area that's, for the lack of a better term, a business park. And there are homes, there are residents as well, and we think this is a very important issue, and this is at least a step in the right direction to not have the encampments during the day blocking all the passageways like everybody's talked about. Thank you very much.
Patty Burmar, Shayla Myers, Eric Ares, Pete White. Furman. Berman.
It's Berman.
Berman.
Yes, that's just fine.
My apologies.
My handwriting is. My name is Patty Berman. I'm the president of the Downtown Los Angeles Neighborhood Council. I'm here today not representing the council because we have not had time to take a vote on any of these issues, but I'm here very much in support of the amendment. In our area, of course, we are, as it's been said, ground zero for these issues, and you're giving the people who need to enforce the sidewalks the way to do it. The people on wheelchairs are having a terrible time downtown. It's becoming worse all the time, and the bottom of this is that we're getting a lot more people leaving. The turnover in that area for rentals and residents is becoming much, much higher, and we worry about this. We have to find a way to make the city wonderful for everyone, and I believe that this amendment is a good start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Shayla Myers, and I'm an attorney with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. And the Legal Aid Foundation, in addition to a number of law firms, on Monday filed suit against the City of Los Angeles in Mitchell versus City of Los Angeles regarding the city's unconstitutional seizure of homeless individuals' property. The ordinance 5611, as drafted today, simply entrenches the policy that the Los Angeles Police Department and the Bureau of Sanitation have been doing against homeless people in the Skid Row area over the last couple of months. It does nothing to decriminalize homelessness. Impounding individuals' property for violation of the law is quite simply criminalization. Is it a criminal penalty for violating a law? As we stand here today, it will do nothing to stop these unconstitutional practices by putting the seizure of property in the same department's hands as those who are engaging in those practices today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Aras. I'm with the LA CAN, and I'm here speaking on behalf of our constituency, hundreds of houseless and extremely low-income folks in Skid Row. We're against the ordinance overall and this amendment. Look, guys, this is about access to sidewalks. Homeless folks in wheelchairs want access to sidewalks too, right? This is about public health. People on the streets want 24-hour restrooms. There are none in Skid Row. People want trash cans. There are more trash cans around City Hall than there are in Skid Row. If you're talking about public health crises, to blame individuals, to create ordinances that makes it illegal for them to be on the streets, and then say that it's a public health crisis, it is a public health crisis that was created by failed policy. And to turn around and create a new law that allows the LAPD and Bureau of Sanitation and street services and any number of departments to use this as an excuse to trigger street sweeps, to clear out areas simply because it's a blight for the people on this side of the aisle, it is unconscionable. I really think that you all should think about this more closely during closed session tomorrow because there's a better way we can move forward.
Thank you. Brian Falls, Blair Beston, Laura Hill.
So Pete White, LA Community Action Network. This is very clearly, as you know, criminalization. When we think about what the Interagency Council on Homelessness considers criminalization, this is the poster child of that. It's interesting. I'm going to lift the elephant in the room. We're talking about black people as well. We're talking about black lives not mattering. I'm looking at you, Marquise Harris Dawson, and thinking about the report that you just released that defined homelessness in South Los Angeles as being a black phenomenon. That sort of dug into deindustrialization, right? Dug into welfare reform, dug into unemployment, underemployment, and all of the other things, dug into the crime act of Bill Clinton and the rise of the prison industrial complex, right? All of these things have given rise to people living on our streets and having nothing. And the answer will not be, on my watch, over my dead body, further criminalization. Black lives, in fact, do matter, and I'm looking at black folks to do something about that.
Hi, my name is Brian Falls. I'm a development manager with the Rakovich Company. We're the developer of the block. It's a city block in downtown LA bounded by 7th, Hope, Flower, and 8th Street. We fully understand the difficult task of balancing the status quo, but we believe that the slight amendment proposed by the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee will encourage voluntary compliance. I'm here to voice our support to the committee to adopt the ordinance as amended by the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. Blair Beston, Historic Core Business Improvement District and also downtown resident. We support the amended 5611. The status quo is unfair to everyone in the community. Thank you for your efforts to encourage compliance with the deconstruction of tents during non-Jones hours and excessive amounts of belongings that are on the public spaces. This is not just an effort by LAPD. It should be noted that watershed and sanitation are at the forefront of these duties to clean up hazards, so thank you also for those resources. Thank you also for the positive efforts that you've made on the city and the county. We commend you for them. You recognize the urgency not just to consider long-term efforts like permanent supportive housing, which will take years and billions of dollars, but the immediate need for mental health and addiction outreach, temporary shelter, and regionalized storage facilities. If these efforts continue in conjunction with enforcement, it makes compliance humane and profound. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I represent the South Park Business Improvement District. We are a 52-block neighborhood in downtown LA, which includes LA Live, the Staples Center, the Los Angeles Convention Center, over 300 businesses, and a fast-growing residential population. The South Park bid supports Section 5611 ordinance as amended by the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee. The slight amendment will encourage voluntary compliance with daily tent deconstruction. Homeless individuals must know they have to take their tents down daily between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. or face a violation. We must encourage as much voluntary compliance as possible for homeless individuals to deconstruct their tents. The South Park bid receives complaints daily about tents and other items left by homeless individuals blocking the public right-of-way. We've received complaints from everyone from business owners stating that it's negatively impacting their profits, residents who feel unsafe leaving their homes, parents of Metro Charter school students who feel unsafe walking to school, and much more. We have the opportunity now to make sure that voluntary compliance with daily tent deconstruction.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have Mr. Ken, I think. K. And then I have someone named The Midnight Mission. And I have someone named Miss Autry.
I'm a member of LA CAN, and I do believe, because they are a human rights organization. We've been saying for months and months, 5611 and the amendments to it are criminalizing the homeless. It might start with a citation that they can't pay. You don't recognize black homeless people in Skid Row as human beings. They're just as human as members of this commission, materially more poor, but just as human, with human rights. Where is the housing? Amendment 5611 is divergent from providing housing. Housing is a human right.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sean Oney, volunteer manager at the Midnight Mission. The Midnight Mission provides critical safety net services including food and shelter in Skid Row 365 days a year, and offers a substance abuse recovery services to over 600 people each year in our downtown facility. Unfortunately, almost 70% of the men, women, and children who experience homelessness in Los Angeles have no place to go for shelter on any given night in Los Angeles. Even those who are fortunate enough to secure a shelter bed are usually sent back out to the streets at 7 a.m. We are all aligned with the goal of getting people who are experiencing homelessness off our sidewalks and streets. We want to encourage the community to focus its efforts on identifying and creating housing opportunities so the solution is not just a 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. solution. Additionally, with over 25% of our homeless self-declaring substance use disorders, we encourage the city to ensure that strategies including appropriate treatment and program alternatives to these particularly difficult to serve men and women who suffer from addiction while experiencing street homelessness.
Thank you so much. That concludes the public comment. Those are all the cards we have. And we won't take any more cards. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Autry. I did call your name.
Thank you. I just, again, like for on the record, to support what my colleagues have already expressed in terms of discouraging you from justifying or the justification of confiscation of our personal belongings, the damaging of our personal belongings. I am labeled homeless even as a single black female housed here in downtown proper, and labeled as a homeless woman, justifying the confiscation of or damaging of my property. The maintenance men enter my room at will, damaging my personal belongings, holes in my clothes, lice, bed bugs, mold, which is a very serious offense. And there's really little recourse that I have. So again, in an attempt to put me in the street so that the police can continue with their murder, torture, abuse of homeless people because of your incrimination. We are humans, and we have a right to the maintenance of our property without being dehumanized further, and we require that it stops immediately.
Thank you. So that concludes public comment. Those are all the cards that we have. I'll ask, I think we have two representatives from the City Attorney's Office, City Attorney Kapoor and City Attorney Flores, to join us at the center table to entertain discussion and questions from the members of the committee. So I'll begin to my left with Mr. Bonin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just start out by saying a couple things, and then I have quite a few questions for City Attorney. This is a decision a vote that does not have a good choice either way. As far as I'm concerned, either option, voting yes or no on what's before us today, is bad, because I think we're approaching this really from the wrong direction. I was struck by the fact that one of the speakers came up today and said that the only common sense approach to dealing with this issue is voting yes on version B today. I don't think any of the options before us are common sense. I think the only common sense approach to dealing with this situation is actually to be providing sufficient storage so people aren't leaving stuff on the sidewalk in the first place. And I think that as a body, we have failed at that. And I think I was very disappointed that of all the folks who came up in support of version B today, not a single person mentioned storage. Not a single person called for storage. And we absolutely need to have more storage in the city of Los Angeles. I'm going to be starting some storage in my district. On the 29th, I'll be picking a location that we're going to start using in my district. And I hope that everybody who's coming out here today and is objecting to encampments is going to be knocking on the doors of the other council members and asking for storage facilities in their district, because it's absolutely ridiculous and inhumane to be taking belongings away from people if we don't have an alternative for them. And it is folly, really, for us to keep trying to do that, because we're just going to wind up in court again. And at this point, we may as well just open up the keys to the reserve fund to Carol Sobel, because we keep losing these lawsuits. And we keep failing the people of Los Angeles in our neighborhoods, and we keep having more and more encampments. Now, the thing I struggle with today is, with this vote, is approving version B today, I think is bad because we should be doing storage instead. But approving version B today is actually better than what's on the books today, which is better than what was on the books 6 months ago. So it is an incremental improvement. Let me pursue my line of questioning this way. I am focused on attended belongings. That's what I want to talk about. I think through some of the work of this committee, we have guided City Attorney's Office to present a couple alternatives to us today that did some things that dramatically improve on the previous version. We took the commercial stuff out and we put that in a separate ordinance, which I think is good because it was confusing issues. We made clear a big distinction between unattended and attended belongings. The point of the motions I was trying to make, and I appreciate the City Attorney's Office tried to get to that point in both versions, was that I really don't think we should be removing attended belongings unless we're providing storage. And I was looking for a way to build into an ordinance a way really to force those of us in elected office to create storage in our districts, because without the storage, you wouldn't then have the opportunity to do the cleanups. because I do think we have to be doing cleaning. I think the current situation is unacceptable, that we have unpassable sidewalks, and I don't agree with folks who say that we should have no rules and we should repeal this entirely, because we need to have some order in our neighborhoods. So for me, the question is what to do with the attended belongings. And let's put aside version A, because I don't think anybody is seriously advocating for version A at this point. In version B, please talk me through what is the situation with attended belongings, what can someone have, under what circumstances, and when can attended belongings be either moved or removed?
Okay, thank you very much. If you look at Section 3 of the ordinance, that's where sort of the substance of the ordinance kicks in. And one thing that version B does is it separates out attended property and what the city may do with that, and unattended property. So attended property is discussed in 3B. And unlike the current version of 5611, now someone is entitled to keep 60 gallons worth of property with them that will not be impounded. And so if they're...
Let me just repeat that, because I want to do this step by step. Right now, under the current ordinance, you're not allowed to have any belongings attended or unattended.
That you cannot carry it.
Okay.
Correct.
Under version B, you would be allowed to have a sizable amount of belongings with you.
Yes.
60 gallons.
Right,
worth.
and the 60 gallons was meant to allow someone to have a deconstructed tent, bedding, clothes, food, medicine, documents. We tried to pick an amount that would allow someone to live on the street if they had no other alternatives.
And that quantity, that amount, 60 gallons, it doesn't matter whether or not there is voluntary storage provided by the city in any proximity.
Well, the city, if there's excess of 60 gallons that any one person claims ownership of, the city can only impound the excess if the city can store it. So this ordinance would say if the city doesn't have storage capacity, it cannot impound anything.
So I want to make sure, I don't want us to, and I started this, so I apologize. I shouldn't say the word storage. I think for the purpose of this discussion, we should always say either voluntary or involuntary storage, because they're two very different things.
Correct.
So what you were saying is that the city can't remove anything in excess of 60 gallons if there is insufficient involuntary storage.
Correct.
Okay. You can have 60 gallons regardless of whether or not the city is providing storage, voluntary storage.
Right. Whether there is voluntary storage or is not voluntary storage capacity available at any given time, every individual will be entitled to maintain 60 gallons of personal property in the public areas.
And that translates into what visually? I mean, how would I picture what 60
Okay,
gallons?
so by reference, our, the green bins that the city uses for recycling, green waste, that's 60 gallons worth with the lid closed.
Okay.
The only thing, and you maybe are going to get there, is that does change if voluntary storage is created in various parts or any part of the city, and then through further council action, there would have to be affirmative council action, a more restrictive set of requirements could be imposed in a radius around that voluntary storage.
As currently written, the new version of 5611, even if the city provides no additional storage, would still let every single person maintain up to 60 gallons worth of personal property that could not be impounded.
And when is attended belongings up to 60 gallons when there is sufficient storage capacity, involuntary storage capacity? When is that 60 gallons allowed by the city to be removed or moved?
Right. So if under version B, if the city provides additional storage capacity for voluntary storage, the CAO will let the city council know through a report the amount and location of that voluntary storage capacity that's new. At that point, the council could impose a more restricted volume on the amount of personal property a person could maintain, and could limit it to a backpack-sized amount of property. If there was either a subsidized transportation to that new voluntary storage, or the voluntary storage was within a 2-mile radius of the homeless person.
So let me do this scenario. The city has sufficient involuntary storage capacity, and the city has no voluntary storage capacity nearby. I am living on the street and I have 60 gallons worth of stuff, 50 or 60 gallons worth of stuff. In what circumstances can the city move those materials or seize those materials?
Immediately, if this version B is adopted by the council, right now, there's no circumstance under which the city could impound that 60 gallons unless, well, I think he's talking maybe for operation. I'm sorry. Oh, right. Unless we can move it temporarily or impound it if it's in the way of a city cleanup. We could also move or impound it if it's blocking a doorway or ADA compliance. Or we could also move or impound it if it was in an area that had a posted closing time, like a library. But otherwise, 60 gallons is everyone's basic right. They can maintain the 60 gallons. Nothing would change that unless the city increases in the future voluntary storage. And at that point, it would come back to the council to decide whether, in light of that new voluntary storage capacity, the city wanted to restrict the volume of personal property someone could maintain on the public area in a close proximity to that new storage.
So let me put aside the question of moving the materials then. I can understand that if city crew is out doing some cleaning and there's someone there with their materials, the city will move it to clean the sidewalk, or the city will move it further away from 10 feet from a door. Under what circumstances is the city allowed to, or is the city going to seize attended materials below 60 gallons when it's an ADA situation or when it's near a doorway? When are we actually confiscating stuff?
Well, so the protocols that are being developed by LA SAN will determine the factors that the LA Sanitation Department would use. But we believe that if there's a feasible place within the same block to move the belongings that won't interfere with ADA access or won't block a doorway, that would be the first choice. So the blocking 60 gallons worth would be moved to another place on the block that wouldn't create an obstruction. If there is no place on the block for that material to be used, then it would be impounded.
Any other circumstances under which the 60 gallons worth would be seized or impounded?
Only if items in there were health hazards or contraband.
So those were a couple exceptions you made. What is determined to be a hazard?
Again, the protocols will specify that, but they are materials that are have feces or are rat infested or hypodermic needles. There are things like that that are actually, per se health hazards.
And one of the other exceptions is stuff that constitutes evidence of a crime.
Right.
What meets that definition?
A firearm, a knife, drugs. And in that case, the protocols will ask for LAPD to take possession and accord that evidence the same treatment they would apply to any contraband.
If those things are among the 60 gallons of attended materials, how are we even going to know it's there?
Well, if it was in plain sight, obviously, I don't think if someone can see that there's only 60 gallons worth, the city is not going to rifle through them. But if in the process of moving the materials
or there's something in plain sight that is obviously a health hazard or a contraband, then the city could remove it.
So could you tell me in what, the fact that you, under current ordinance, can't have any attended belongings. Under this revision, version B, you're allowed to have 60 gallons worth of attended belongings. That is certainly a more permissive step that is taken in version B. Is there anything else in version B that is more permissive than what we have on the books now?
Yes, actually. And it's one of the amendments that the city attorney's office offered up in version B. It wasn't in the instructions, but we would like to make an exception in terms of bulky items to allow people to keep wheelchairs, operational bicycles, crutches, and also a container to be able to move around their 60 gallons. Because that would actually be also helpful to the city if the city's coming for a street cleaning, if somebody has something to wheel the materials away in, that would actually be helpful to the person to be able to move around with their 60 gallons. So that's another way in which this current version B is more permissive than what's on the books today.
And I suspect you may tell me we can only talk about this, we can't talk about this in open session, but I'm concerned about any ordinance that we have withstanding legal challenge. It's going to face legal challenge, of that I'm certain. And the thing that I'm frustrated by is that we've done, a generation's worth of different ordinances, and we keep getting slapped for them. Because we keep saying we're taking this balanced approach, and we're not. Our idea of a balanced approach is jumping on one side of the seesaw and saying that it's balanced. I mean, we keep doing the confiscation, but not doing the storage or the other provisions. Absent providing lots of storage in the city, aren't we still going to wind up in legal trouble?
Well, again, we believe the fact that a person may maintain 60 gallons of personal property, which again is enough to have a tent, a sleeping bag, clothes, medicine, papers, ID, and other personal effects, food, is hopefully the right balance. This is sort of uncharted territory. Ultimately, a court will, may be asked to look at our ordinance. But again, we are also under an obligation as a city to keep the public areas clean and healthy and available for ADA access. And so, unlike the other ordinances that did not allow, anything a person couldn't carry, this ordinance does at least try to strike a balance. We also looked at other cities, and there are other cities that limit the volume that any single homeless person may maintain in a public area. And we think that's evidence that other cities have struggled with this balance as well. We do believe this is a lawful ordinance, and a court would appreciate the dueling interests that we're trying to serve and hopefully uphold the ordinance.
Is our position at all weakened by the point that one of the speakers made earlier, that we're arguing health and safety, but we're not providing bathrooms and trash cans?
Anything we can do to, increase bathrooms that are public, I think would be helpful. We do have bathrooms in our parks and our libraries that are open to the public.
Not 24/7.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we certainly could do a better job of that. And this ordinance doesn't go specifically to that question, but deals more with accumulated personal property. But certainly, I think everyone in the city recognizes the need for additional facilities.
And Councilmember, if I could just add a couple of things. First of all, as you've already pointed out, it's extremely important that the city continue on its path of providing the services that these individuals need, and it's very important for anything that we do, including in litigation, that we are presenting a balanced approach that is a multifaceted approach, and that this is not the only avenue we're taking. The other very important part of this is that the ordinance has to be applied appropriately, and that's what the sanitation protocols hopefully will assure, but it has to be a consistent application throughout the city by all city partners, which includes sanitation and LAPD, and we have to be following the tenets of the ordinance in order for it to be defendable in a court.
And I think the last question, I was going to wrap up, but it occurred to me I have one more question, is I think I know the answer to this, but I think it's important to have it in the record, is why did we choose to have a limit on the amount of attended belongings? And how did we pick 60 gallons?
Yeah. Without a limit, we can't really balance our other duty to keep the streets clean and accessible. So again, in picking the volume, we tried to account for how much property would be sufficient to live on the street in a tent if that were the only option. And that's the only real way I can answer it.
I do know that I've had situations where someone has claimed an entire block's worth of stuff as their own, so I understand the importance of creating a certain amount. Did we confer with anybody other than ourselves about what the right amount would be? Did we confer with social service agencies or homeless activists or anybody?
We did, especially in developing the protocols, and while we were still in the process of drafting 5611, we did partner with LASA to develop the protocols around 5611, so we could not only ensure that there would be a lot of LASA outreach before we engaged in cleanup operations, but to weigh in regarding some of the issues you've raised.
Yeah, I was curious, not about the general rules, but whether or not we had anybody give us some guidance about what the right amount is. It sounds like the rationale for the amount we have is a reasonable one, but that's reasonable to us. I'm just wondering if any of people who are homeless or homeless agencies that provide social services weighed in on that.
Right. Well, and actually, if you recall, in the council motion, you did specify 60 gallons, but again, that's a policy call, so that is subject to change. Again, I'm not sure there's a perfect number, but.
Right.
The other factor of 60 gallons is the size of the container that an individual is allowed if they were to voluntarily store. So that was kind of a comparison that I think was also made when the original motion was done.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chair. That's all I got for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bonin. Mr. Cedillo.
I'll hold my comments for right now, sir.
Mr. Price.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly appreciate the hard work and the input from everyone on this matter. And I agree with my colleague. I think B is the best the best choice we have, making the best of a bad situation, if you will. And I agree totally that we have to provide areas for storage. And we also, in District 9, are looking for some locations that would be suitable for storage. But I'm reflecting concerns raised certainly by the advocates, homeless advocates, but also by citizens, by neighbors who complain about not being able to pass on the street, streets not being clean. And this goes if it's a tent or a multicolored box or some other device. I think we just have to do more. I'm allocating some discretionary money for outreach workers, in fact, that are targeting specifically homeless encampments in the 9th District in a concentrated way. And we're having some success, but certainly we need to do a lot more. And so, I think we have to keep working with all of the stakeholders in this matter. I'm convinced that we're going to perhaps have to tweak this a little bit more, even after we approve it, but that it is a start, and it is an attempt to balance the equities on both sides. So I'll be supporting option B. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chair. Excellent. It should also be noted, Mr. Cedillo, we're also have available Commander Todd Chamberlain from LAPD and Steve Peterson and Gonzalo Barrega from Sanitation. One more time, any questions, comments? Because we're moving. We have not heard from LASA. We do have representation from LASA.
Coming up.
Sure. Peter?
Before we move on, in the process of preparing the protocols, we at the City Attorney's Office did find some areas in the version B that we would like to propose amending, cleanup, and for consistency, and we think will actually strengthen the ordinance and make it in some ways a little more compassionate. May I quickly run through those?
Do we have the protocols?
They're not done, but I'm saying when we were helping sanitation prepare the protocols, it occurred to us in the City Attorney's Office that there are a few amendments we'd like to make to clean up to the ordinance itself.
Can I ask when we're going to see the protocols?
I believe, there's a good first draft that's been done, and after this meeting, we'll be meeting with the Department of Sanitation to try to finalize those.
So we're going to be voting for the ordinance, but the protocols won't be ready even though it's an urgency ordinance?
Well, I don't know about the timing. Again, that's up to you, but we do have a good first draft done of the protocols. But may I quickly run through the amendments just so we have them in mind? The one thing we'd like to do is amend the definition of bulky items to include the provision I noted about the containers to wheel the belongings. We'd like to add that as an exemption as well, and also note that bulky items include sheds and other small structures. We'd also like to add a new definition, and that would be a definition of city employee. That was used in the ordinance throughout, and in discussions with the Bureau of Sanitation, we realized that they use some contractors for some of the cleanings, and so we want to make clear that a city employee would include a city contractor. We would also, in section 3C, at the very end, we would like to add a reference to 3B. That was simply an omission where it says pursuant to section...
I'm sorry, on your last change, perhaps it doesn't mean this, but I want to make sure. Are you saying that city contractors would be engaged in the confiscation of people's belongings on behalf of the city, or are you saying they would just be part of a general cleanup?
Currently, the Bureau of Sanitation does use some contractors for cleanings, and we wanted to make sure that their role in the cleanings would be authorized by this ordinance. And in the future, as far as I know, that's the only contract situation that we have at the present time, so that's the only one that we're aware of.
So yes or no, will they be, non-city employees be involved in confiscation of individuals' belongings?
We could defer to sanitation, but our understanding is that currently contractors are only used for cleaning like the sidewalks and but not the actual confiscation.
Okay, I'm sorry. So back to 3C, we would like to add at the very end of that section a reference to 3B, which was inadvertently omitted when Section A was changed into Section A and B to note the difference between attended and unattended property. The other change we'd like to propose is to add a phrase to the end of the first section in Section 4 that would say that the pre-removal notice, so the notice that gets posted on property to let someone know that the city will be back in as soon as 24 hours to remove the excess property, or if it's unattended, the property. We would like to require that the city actually begin the removal process within 72 hours of posting that notice, so that the notice is fresh. We don't want to have stale notices out there or have a situation where 2 weeks ago, the city posts a notice, and then the person doesn't really know when the city's coming back. So we think it would actually strengthen the protection for the homeless person if the city actually has a requirement to begin the cleanup within 72 hours after posting. Or the notice is stale and the city would have to repost if it actually intends to come out after the 72 hours. And then another omission we would like to clear up in section 10D. We would want to make clear that a willful obstruction would include someone refusing to vacate or retreat from an obscure area caused by a bulky item. It was just an omission in the original drafting again because that phrase was changed. And then also on provision J in section 3, we would like to note that when additional storage is provided in the future, that
Voluntary or involuntary?
Voluntary. If the city provides voluntary storage in the future, that the more restricted backpack size volume of property that someone may keep in the public area would be limited to within 2 miles of the voluntary storage facility or 10 miles if the city provided subsidized transportation.
I've got to object strongly to that second part. The 2 miles I'm okay with. Having more flexibility in areas that are close to voluntary storage was my idea in the first place. I have an objection, though, to saying you can have more restrictions within a 10-mile radius of somewhere that we give you a bus token to. I live probably 10 or 11 miles from City Hall in Mar Vista, and the idea that someone would, with a bus token, would on a daily basis be checking in their stuff potentially at a downtown facility just doesn't work. I mean, it's not practicable. So I'd want to strike that part about the 10-mile radius.
And further, I thought I heard you both just say that the city would have to pass more restrictions if the storage were to materialize.
Right.
And now it sounds like you're trying to make it a part of this. Perhaps I'm confused.
Well, we could leave it unspecified and just have the council decide when it learns what new storage has become available. At that point, decide how far the radius should extend, and if there's a transportation system, depending on where it is in the city, traffic may be better or worse. So we're fine with leaving J as written, which would allow the council flexibility once it learns of new storage to take into consideration that new storage and make its own radius.
These parameters, as suggested, would be parameters that council would be limited to when they took that affirmative action, if they wanted to be limited by the ordinance. If not, then the language shouldn't be.
But it would still come back to us.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
I'd still be comfortable with not having the 10-mile radius and the public transportation provision in there.
Okay, so then you would prefer J as written in version B.
Yeah.
Oh, you want the 2 mile? You want the 2 miles?
I'm fine with the 2 mile part.
You don't even want the 2 mile?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, you're fine with the 2 mile, but not the mileage being set for a
I think we may
transportation
want to do something like that, but I think 10 miles is much further than is reasonable and practicable.
Again, and you could make that decision once you learn where the facility is and how much.
Right. And my problem with the 10-mile thing is I think what happens is I'm trying to find ways to encourage and incentivize myself and everybody else to do more storage in their districts. And I'm afraid if we have the 10-mile radius with subsidized transportation, we're going to wind up keeping all the storage in Mr. Weezar's district.
Fair enough.
Just to be clear, though, as we suggested it, which we certainly can take off, was up to 10 miles. So that was your maximum. It
right.
wasn't.
Okay. But we can leave that out.
Yeah.
Does that conclude your changes?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Cedillo and Mr. Lynn, if you could make your way to the... Okay. And also the representative from sanitation. If you could join us at the table. Mr. Bonin at least has a question for you. I think some of us others may as well.
should wait or start?
Well, I have a couple questions. I'm interested in the degree of participation that LASA had in this writing of the ordinance. I'm interested in whether or not there's an outreach component in it. But most importantly is I'm troubled today because, I read this morning about how, yesterday we took action to settle a lawsuit, another lawsuit in which continues to cost the city millions of dollars. It's projected we'll spend over $100 million in lawsuits this year. And so I'm a little, I guess people would say gun shy about us moving forward if it's going to move us into litigation. And I'm also concerned that, I think warnings have been very clear to us from HUD about our proposals. And, if this isn't signed off by HUD, I'm obviously very concerned about that. And so, I think for me, I want to kind of pull back a little bit and just talk about how this seems to be. We get this great report from the CAO, we put together this plan, we are going forward on our efforts to appropriately address homelessness, and then on the other hand, we're still stuck with this bill or proposal or initiative that was put forth and started, I don't know, a year and a half ago under a different context, and it just seems incongruent. So those are my concerns, and I'm interested about your perspective on those thoughts.
Thank you, Council Member. Peter Lynn, Executive Director for the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I did not prepare formal remarks on this. So speaking about the coordination with the City Attorney's Office, we have spoken with them on a few occasions. We have talked through the federal climate, particularly the HUD funding climate, as it relates to homeless assistance funding and the focus that HUD has put on efforts to decriminalize homelessness and the potential loss of funding opportunities, and particularly in terms of disadvantaging our scoring on a competitive basis for new funds or even retaining our funds if we don't follow HUD's guidance on efforts to decriminalize homelessness. So I think it's very, very important that we look hard at that. We ensure that actions that we take, particularly since we are one of the highest populations of homelessness in America, we're clearly on HUD's radar. I think it's incumbent on us to look hard at what we do and ensure that it doesn't represent or look like we're criminalizing homelessness. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to that, and I think it would be very important that we don't have criminal sanctions that look like they're engaged with the mere being of homeless, rather than some other activity that would otherwise engage any person, whether they're housed or homeless, with a criminal justice involvement. We believe very strongly there has to be an outreach component. There have to be services connected to whatever approach we take, and we definitely are engaged with the process of talking to people, encouraging people to come into services, and doing outreach to encampments, particularly those that are in the process of a cleanup, or that are the focus of a cleanup. Clearly, storage is an important element of the discussion here. We're engaged with, as requested by the city, in a process to evaluate facilities for storage. We're engaged with city council offices, with the mayor's office. We've hired a consultant and are working with many different offices, and have a list of more than 20 potential sites that we're working our way through. So I think there's an active, engaged process in that. We'll report back formally on that soon.
But at this point, though, we don't know HUD's disposition on this specifically. They haven't weighed in. They haven't seen this. They haven't.
I think that so. They have not weighed in on this. The way that we may hear first is on the notice of what is the second half of our application for funding in last year's notice of funding availability. So We put in an application for $110 million. They gave us a notice of what is Tier 2, sort of the first chunk of our renewals. We got $84 million. What they didn't give notice on, they didn't give it to anybody, is Tier 2, which are the reallocated monies and some of the bonus monies that were available to us. That's where the most competitive aspect of the NOFA was, and we won't know until they announce it later in the spring, the results of what actions we've taken or have not taken. We're certainly under scrutiny. There's no question.
One last question is, if you know, we're being sued right now. What does this, and this also consideration for the CA, what does this do to the lawsuit? Is this seen as a cure for the current lawsuit, or what type of interface or interaction would you see between the pending lawsuit and these actions?
Councilmember, I'm not in a position to answer that. I don't know.
Mr. Bonin.
Thanks. Follow up, Peter, on Mr. Cedillo's line of questioning. I too have been concerned about the impact laws we have might have on our HUD financing. But I think I want to make sure we're being clear about what we're considering and what we're not considering. I think we're not talking about what is before us today is not keeping the current version of 5611 or repealing 5611 entirely. I mean, there may be some who want to repeal 5611 entirely. I agree we need to keep our sidewalks clear. I mean, we need to have some rules governing our sidewalks. If HUD is concerned with the current version of 5611, wouldn't these amendments be better in their eyes because they are less restrictive and they allow 60 gallons of attended possessions versus 0 possessions under the current ordinance?
So I think to the extent that we're attempting to balance community concerns and to remove potential criminal sanctions from behavior that's associated with homelessness, whether it's having your belongings in public or not, I think that's a step in the right direction. I don't want to pretend that I can speak for HUD or how HUD's going to see it. They certainly have indicated that this is a focus area for them. They are looking at communities and looking at ordinances, policies, and practices to ensure that communities aren't criminalizing homelessness. But I wouldn't, I don't want to pretend that I know exactly what they're thinking. It is important that we balance the community concerns, and I recognize that. It is also very important that we do our utmost to ensure that we're not criminalizing homelessness.
So, as I'm sort of weighing this in my head, I mean, part of me doesn't like perpetuating the sort of approach we're doing, where we're doing the rules before we have the storage, and that says you should vote no. The part of my head that says you should vote yes is that I think this is better than what's currently on the books, that it's an improvement from all perspectives, from the city perspective, but from someone who's living on the street, it's more permissive than currently. And if I'm worried that HUD may ding us on funding to help people, money we sorely need to provide services and housing, that's now pushing me into a yes vote, because if I vote no, I'm keeping on the books an ordinance that HUD has expressed concern about. If I vote yes, I'm mitigating an ordinance that HUD has expressed concern about. You don't need to comment, I guess. So let me ask a question of sanitation. I guess it would be unfair to ask Peter to opine on my thinking out loud. Sanitation. I'm wary of voting for this because the city attorney did a very good job with a very complicated situation, but it still is convoluted. And it took me a while reading this several times and then asking several questions to get a sense of what is permissible and what isn't. And then in my response to some of the questions about what's permissible and what isn't, it was dependent upon the protocols. This ordinance, I understand, is before us in council tomorrow. Where are we with the protocols? I'd feel much more comfortable seeing the protocols before we cast a vote.
afternoon. Adel Haj Khalil, Assistant General Manager with LA Sanitation. The reason for the protocol is actually to clearly take the law and put it into implementable practices, best practices, or practices that we all can be clear about. We have been working very hard. In the last committee, Public Works Committee, we asked for 90 days to do that, and actually we know that was important to get it done fast, and we've committed to get it done really quickly, and that's something we have done. We worked really hard on developing the protocols, the interpretation, and I think we are close to a final version. We're also continuing to review it, and we believe that we should have something very, very quickly done. So we have actually tried very hard to be clear as to how to implement, and I think we have a pretty good understanding on doing it. And I believe, Councilman, I think with the existing ordinance and modifications being proposed before you and the protocols, I think we'll be in a better place because our procedures and protocols will be public. People will know what we're doing. I think we've done a good job in addressing the issues of public health and safety on the streets and the procedures. We've spent a lot of time since 2012 doing a lot of that work, so we have the expertise with our staff and the folks. So the protocol should be ready very quickly. We're doing some additional review right now, and I think within the next few weeks we should be ready to have those adopted.
But there'll be nothing for us to see before we vote in council tomorrow.
I don't think we're ready yet. And I think there's some additional review that still needs to be done. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that we are communicating with the city attorney to ensure that our reading of it is consistent with the current law. We're not putting something in the protocols is not consistent with what's being put in place. So that kind of review is being done as we speak next few days.
And what's the process for revising the protocols if the ones you come up with are unworkable or unacceptable or cause a lot of controversy?
I think we're going to be having a discussion with you. Some of the changes that are interpretation or simple modifications, that should be done administratively, not major. But I think any material changes to the intent of what we're trying to do, I think will come back to your body or whatever body you authorize to become the overseer of such protocol.
So that's what I was getting at, is who approves the protocols? Is it something that Enrique does? Is it something the Board of Public Works does? Is it something the council does?
I think our intent and my understanding is, and that's the policymakers will decide, we'll come to you with the protocols as a first time to see it and adopt them, and then designate somebody to become the custodian, reviewer, and anybody. As we've done in other ordinances in this city, we develop what's called rules and regulations, and those are adopted either by a commission or by the Board of Public Works, etc., to do any changes. But we can specifically talk about material changes versus administrative interpretation. That's something we can do. But it's up to the policymakers to decide how it needs to be done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any others for sanitation?
Valerie Flores again. I did just want to note that there is nothing in the protocols that changes the ordinance. So the ordinance is the law. It sets forth all the legal requirements. And what we've been endeavoring with sanitation to do in the protocols is sort of help them implement them, make sure that their the rollouts are consistent with the ordinance, but also add a little flesh on the bone. So to try to deal with situations, what do you do if you have you're dealing with someone who has a mental impairment and is having trouble understanding the instructions? If someone has more than 60 gallons of items, how you try, and they won't help you pare them down to 60 gallons, what kinds of items you should prioritize for their health and safety. It's those sorts of flesh on the bone sorts of things, but the protocols will be One of the reasons we've spent so much time working with sanitation is we want to make sure they're entirely consistent with the ordinance and don't change it in any way.
Question while Valerie's still here. How often are we assessing and checking whether or not there is sufficient involuntary storage capacity?
Well, again, the ordinance isn't tied to involuntary, yes. Well, I think before the trucks go out to do any pickup, they first find out capacity. But my understanding is for the involuntary capacity, it's not at near capacity, that they do still have some current capacity in the downtown location at least. But also, it's a 90-day storage. So after 90 days, if no one comes to claim it, they do have a regular schedule to open up new spaces. So far, there has been adequate storage, but I think before they go out, they actually check to see what capacity is and make sure they have capacity. Because again, they can't impound anything unless there's capacity.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think given the level of heightened scrutiny on this, it's probably something that we need to make known more widely than just to the drivers.
And we could include actually in the protocols as one of the steps that before a cleaning is authorized, there will be a determination made about the availability of storage, if that would alleviate your concern.
Yeah. Do I need to make an amendment to do that?
No, that's going to be for the protocols, so that doesn't need to be.
I'd actually like to make it part of, maybe make it a direction of the committee so that it's part of the report that will go to council, so that it's something we're voting on. I'd also like, as part of that, to have a report also to council quarterly on the progress of voluntary storage. Where it is in the city, how much it is, and what impact that has had on encampments.
And that would be a report from the CAO's office?
Whoever's going to be managing the storage. I would say LASA and CAO.
Excellent. Any other discussion, members? If not, I'd like to submit a few additional instructions. My goal is that all LAPD officers are equipped with the proper training and resources to ensure safe interactions for both themselves and homeless individuals. I'm confident that with our strategies in dealing with first responder training, as well as coordination with our city staff to review new training materials for LAPD, that we can head in the right direction. We do make a note that documentation tells us that at least a third of the homeless population is in one protected class that is disabled because of mental health conditions, which require special training. Almost half of the homeless population is in another protected class because of civil rights, because they're African American. And so, given that we've had challenges with that in our town, and we know the population that we're sending people to deal with, I want to ask that the Police Commission create a permanent policy of quarterly homeless CompStats in order to diligently track police activity, trends, and performance as it relates to homeless encampments, race, age, and mental capacity of individuals interacting or being arrested as a result of 5611. Additional instruction, I want to ensure that our departments can effectively provide services, so I'd like LASA, Sanitation, and the CAO to provide a report on the resources that they will need to expand the city's capacity to fully implement the protocols of the ordinance, as you've seen discussed. So do we need to vote on these additional instructions first, or do we do the whole thing at once?
No, you can do it.
We can do it all at once?
You can do it at once, Mr. Chair.
So along with those instructions, I want to put forward a motion to concur with the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee recommendation and add the aforementioned instructions that we talked about, and I want to make sure there are no more here. Yes, that's it. So can you give us back what we're doing here?
So what we have before us are the changes requested by the city attorney, the modifications, as well as the changes that you've requested, and Councilmember Bonin's instruction to the CAO for the report.
Okay, so we put forward a motion. Is there a second? Second, Mr. Clerk, can you call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Cedillo?
No.
Councilmember Bonin?
Noting that the approach of doing storage after this is folly, this revised ordinance is better, gentler, smarter, and more legally defensible than what we have currently, and probably puts us in a better position with HUD. I'll reluctantly vote yes.
Councilmember Price? Councilmember Weezer?
Yes.
Councilmember Harris-Dawson?
Aye. Is there anything else before us?
I just would like to make the clarification that now that the ordinance has been modified, tomorrow the report will be to request that the city attorney prepare and present a new modified ordinance or new draft ordinance.
Bring a revised ordinance tomorrow, if that's more amenable to the committee.
The fewer times we have to vote on this, the better.
I'm sorry?
The fewer times we have to vote on
Okay.
5611.
We will come tomorrow with all of the amendments requested.
We appreciate the capacity for speed in these situations. If there's nothing further, we're adjourned.